In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, 7,200 feet above sea level, the monastery of Debre Damo sits on a sandstone mesa accessible only by rope. No road reaches it. No vehicle has ever arrived there. The monks who maintain its manuscript library have not permitted a foreign researcher inside since 1948. Inside those walls, in a cedar-lined chamber, sits a collection of Gia's parchment manuscripts that includes portions of the Book of Enoch not found in any Western archive. The Council of Laodicea expunged the Book of Enoch from Scripture in 364 CE, banned, suppressed, called corrupting by the Church Fathers who chose what stayed in Scripture. For 17 centuries, most of the world had no access to it. Then in 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls surfaced at Qumran and changed the picture entirely. Among the fragments recovered from Cave 4, researchers identified 11 separate manuscripts of Enoch in Aramaic, more copies than were found of Ezra, more than Chronicles, more than several books that survived into the modern Bible with no controversy attached. What scholars found inside those fragments broke from everything the Church had taught about the nature of demons. Not metaphorically, not interpretively, the text makes a specific structural claim about what demons are, where they came from, and why they exist in a form capable of affecting human beings at all. This is where the account becomes genuinely troubling. The claim Enoch makes is not that demons are fallen angels. That is the popular version. That is the version most people repeat without checking the source. The actual text draws a distinction so precise that the entire popular understanding collapses when you read it directly. Chapter 15 of the Book of Enoch is where the definition appears. The passage survives in the Gia's manuscript tradition held by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, in the Aramaic fragments from Qumran, and in the Greek Codex Panapolitanus discovered in Akhmim, Egypt in 1886. All three textual traditions agree on the core content. Dr. George Nicholsberg, whose 2001 commentary on Enoch for Fortress Press remains the most exhaustive scholarly treatment in English, described chapter 15 as the theological center of the entire Book of the Watchers, not a peripheral passage, the axis around which the whole section turns. Chapter 15 begins with God speaking directly to Enoch and instructing him to deliver a message to the Watchers, the angels who descended to earth and took human wives. The Watchers are already imprisoned at this point in the narrative. Their sentence is already in place, but God draws a distinction that most translations obscure. He separates the Watchers themselves from what their offspring became. These are not the same category of being. The text insists on that difference with unusual precision. Verse 8 contains the definition. The Gias reads, translated directly by Dr. Ephraim Isaac in his 1983 Oxford edition, "And now the giants who are born from the union of spirits and of flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on earth shall be their habitation." The giants, the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers and human women, are described not as beings who later became demons. They are demons in the moment of their death. Their nature produces that result automatically. Then arrives what defies all reason. Verse 9 explains the mechanism. God tells Enoch that evil spirits proceed from the bodies of the giants because they were born from above and from below. The Gia's phrase is min leul wa min taft, meaning from the upper and from the lower, from the spiritual and from the physical simultaneously. When a being of pure spirit dies, nothing remains to wander. When a being of pure flesh dies, the physical body returns to earth and the soul follows the appointed path. But a being of mixed origin, half angelic, half human, occupies a category for which the normal process of death has no resolution. The spiritual component cannot ascend. It has no right of return to the upper realm. The physical body dies and decays. But the spirit that animated that body is released without destination. That released spirit is what the text calls a demon. Not a fallen angel, not a rebellious heavenly being, something categorically different, an entity that exists in a state the created order never accounted for, produced by an event that was never supposed to happen. Dr. Nicholsberg noted that the language in verse 9 is unusually technical for this section of Enoch, suggesting the author was working from a specific theological framework rather than composing freely. The precision is intentional. The distinction is the point. Chapter 15 continues in verse 11 with a description of what these spirits do and why. Because they emerged from human bodies, they are drawn to human bodies. The Gias says they afflict, oppress, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth and cause trouble. They take no food but hunger and thirst and cause offenses. These spirits, Enoch writes, will rise against the children of men and against women because they proceeded from them. The origin creates the compulsion. They return to what produced them. That is the mechanism the text gives for demonic activity affecting human beings. It is not arbitrary cruelty. It is the consequence of a specific genealogy. Here's where it gets active. Chapter 16 continues the address and adds a detail that Western translations frequently soften or omit entirely. The Gia's manuscript tradition, as confirmed by Dr. Michael Knibb in his 1978 Oxford translation, includes verse 1 of chapter 16 specifying a time limit. The evil spirits born from the giants will proceed to corrupt, and to fall, and to contend, and to bruise upon the earth until the day of the great consummation, when the great age will be consummated for the watchers and for the godless ones. The evil spirits do not operate without a terminus. The text builds in a fixed endpoint. Their activity is bounded by the same final judgment that governs the imprisonment of the watchers themselves. What makes this structurally significant is the relationship the text establishes between two different groups. The watchers are imprisoned, physically contained in specific locations, awaiting sentencing. The demonic spirits produced by the deaths of their offspring are not imprisoned. They are loose, uncontained, active on the surface of the earth. The text describes what amounts to two separate problems requiring two separate resolutions. The parent beings are sealed away below. The byproduct beings are circulating above. The proceedings of the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE struck this material from Scripture, and the official justification given by church records from that period was that the Book of Enoch contained material that exceeded the limits of acceptable revelation. Banned, filed away, called dangerous by leaders who had read it carefully enough to understand exactly why it was dangerous. The Greek Codex Panapolitanus, recovered from a monk's grave at Akhmim in Upper Egypt in 1886, and now held at the Cairo Museum, preserves an independent textual tradition of the same passage. The Akhmim text renders chapter 15 verse 8 with an additional phrase absent from the standard R. H. Charles 1906 translation. The additional phrase, identified by Dr. Matthew Black in his 1985 commentary for Brill Academic Press, specifies that the evil spirits will cause suffering without ceasing until the day of destruction, using a Gia's construction that implies continuous, uninterrupted activity. Charles omitted it. His 1906 edition remains the version most English readers encounter. Most of what people believe about Enoch comes from a translation that cut that clause before anyone outside academic circles had a chance to read it. Fragment 4Q204, stored at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and radiocarbon dated to approximately 150 BCE, preserves portions of chapters 14 and 15 in Aramaic. The fragment was published in the Discoveries in the Judean Desert series, Volume 36, edited by John Strugnell and Devorah Demont. The relevant section of chapter 15 in 4Q204 aligns with the Gia's tradition on the core definition. The Aramaic term used for the spirits of the giants is ruhin bisha, evil spirits, a term that appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls and other contexts exclusively to describe active, roaming, non-embodied harmful forces. Not imprisoned beings, not contained entities, active presences. The terminology is consistent across three independent manuscript traditions, spanning three different languages and geographical origins. Dr. Lauren Stuckenbrook, whose 2007 volume on the giant tradition for Brill remains the most detailed treatment of the Nephilim mythology across Second Temple Jewish texts, observed that the Book of Enoch's demonology is unique in ancient literature for providing a causal account of demonic origins rather than simply asserting their existence. Every other ancient tradition in the Near East simply posits evil spirits as part of the created order. Enoch is the only text that explains how they got here, what they are made of, and why their behavior follows the pattern it does. That specificity, Stuckenbrook wrote, suggests the author was working from either a very old tradition or a very deliberate theological construction. The text is not improvising, but here's what makes this stranger. Chapter 69 of the Book of Enoch, part of the parable section preserved primarily in the Ethiopian Gia's tradition, returns to the subject of the spirits and adds a detail that the earlier chapters omit. Verse 12 introduces a figure named Gadriel, described as the one who led Eve astray. The text identifies Gadriel as one of the Watchers, one of the descended angels, but his offspring are not discussed in the same terms as the Nephilim of chapters 6 through 15. Chapter 69 verse 12 says Gadriel showed the children of men the instruments of death, all the weapons of war. He is credited with introducing violence as a technology. His category of harm is different. The spirits of the Nephilim harm by affliction and possession. Gadriel's contribution is knowledge transferred to human beings, who then act on it themselves. The text is constructing a taxonomy. Multiple categories of harm, multiple mechanisms of corruption, multiple points of origin. The demonic spirits of chapter 15 are one type. The knowledge corruptions of chapter 69 are another. The imprisoned watchers of chapters 17 through 21 are a third. Enoch is not describing a monolithic category of evil. It is describing an ecology of harmful forces, each with its own origin, its own mechanism, and its own relationship to the human world. The Church removed this from Scripture. The reason most frequently cited in patristic literature is that the material concerning the Watchers and their offspring was considered too detailed about the mechanics of evil. Jerome, writing around 400 CE in his commentary on the Book of Daniel, called Enoch's account of fallen angel reproduction and its consequences a fable unfit for serious theological attention. Augustine described the Watcher tradition in the City of God as an embarrassment to proper Christian doctrine. Both men had read the text. Both men dismissed it in writing. Neither man explained the textual evidence in the way the fragments recovered 15 centuries later now require. The 1947 Qumran discoveries forced the question back into academic view. By the 1970s, scholars working with the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments had confirmed that the Enochic demonology predated the New Testament by at least 2 centuries. John Collins, in his 1998 volume on apocalyptic literature for Eerdmans, noted that the New Testament's own references to demons are most coherently interpreted against the background of Enochic tradition. When the Gospel of Mark describes Jesus encountering an unclean spirit that cries out and convulses a man before departing, the vocabulary used, the behavior described, the assumption that these spirits recognize divine authority and are subject to it, all of that maps directly onto the framework laid out in Enoch chapter 15. The New Testament authors knew the Enochic tradition. Their demonology assumes it without explaining it, because their audience already understood the background. What the text of Enoch describes, when you read it without the editorial interference of the 1906 Charles translation, or the theological filtering of the patristic period, is a system. The Watchers descended. They produced the Nephilim. The Nephilim died in the flood. Their spirits, being of mixed origin and therefore without an appointed destination after death, were released onto the earth as roaming, uncontained, hostile presences drawn back toward human bodies because human bodies are what produced them. The imprisoned Watchers await a final judgment beneath specific geographical locations. Their disembodied offspring circulate above the surface with a fixed terminus tied to the same judgment. That is the model. That is what the text actually says, in the Aramaic fragments at Qumran, and the Giaz manuscripts at Axum, and in the Greek text recovered from a burial site in Upper Egypt. The part that shouldn't be possible is the level of structural consistency across those 3 independent traditions. These manuscripts did not share a single point of transmission after a certain period. The Ethiopian Church preserved Enoch in isolation for centuries. The Qumran community was destroyed in 70 CE, and its library buried. The Akhmim Codex was interred with a single monk and forgotten. All 3 arrived at the same definition through completely separate chains of transmission. The same Giaz phrase, the same Aramaic terminology, the same structural distinction between the imprisoned Watchers and their disembodied offspring. 3 separate manuscript lines, 3 separate languages, 3 separate geographical traditions, and the core account does not change. No follow-up survey of the full Ethiopian manuscript collection at Debre Damo has ever been authorized. The monastery's abbot, in a statement relayed through the Ethiopian Orthodox Patriarchate in Addis Ababa in 2011, confirmed that the facility holds manuscript material not yet catalogued by outside scholars, and that access will remain restricted to initiated members of the monastic community. Researchers at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library in Collegeville, Minnesota, who have digitized portions of related Ethiopian church collections, estimate that the Deborah Damo holdings may include Enoch variants not reflected in any currently published edition. No institution has been granted permission to verify that estimate.